If you've ever felt trapped by the people who are supposed to love you most, if you've ever had your own reality questioned until you started to doubt your own mind, then you need to hear my story. It's a story about waking up in more ways than one, and it's a story about how the quietest person in the room can sometimes make the most noise. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you how I dismantled my family's perfect life with nothing but the truth they tried so hard to bury. And stick around to the end, because I want to hear from you. I want to know if you think I went too far, or if you would have done the exact same thing. My world came back to me in fragments, like a shattered mirror. For 6 months there was nothing, a blank, dreamless void. Then, slowly, sounds started to bleed through the silence. The rhythmic beep of a machine, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the hushed, anxious whispers of voices I knew but couldn't place. When I finally managed to pry my eyelids open, the light was a physical assault. It was sharp and sterile, and it smelled of antiseptic and stale flowers. The first thing I saw was my mother's face, hovering above me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. Beside her stood my father, his jaw tight, his posture rigid, and behind them my older brother Julian, looking bored and slightly inconvenienced as always. They were my family, and they were here to welcome me back to a life that wasn't mine. The words they used were soft, wrapped in the cotton wool of pity. They told me there had been an accident, a terrible car crash on a rain-slicked road. I had been in a coma ever since. For a moment, a wave of pure animal relief washed over me. I was alive, but then a name, a face, a feeling of profound connection surfaced from the fog. Liam. Where was Liam? I tried to speak his name, but my throat was a desert and only a dry croak came out. My mother seemed to understand. She took my hand, her grip a little too tight, a little too possessive. Her voice dropped to a somber, rehearsed whisper. Liam was in the car with me, she said. He hadn't been as lucky. He was gone. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables. Gone. Liam wasn't a person who could be gone. He was a fixed point in my universe. He was the pull of gravity, the warmth of the sun, the reason I breathed easier. The beeping of the machine next to me sped up, a frantic electronic heartbeat that matched the panic exploding in my chest. My father stepped forward then, placing a heavy hand on my mother's shoulder. His voice was the one he used for business, calm, authoritative, leaving no room for argument. He told me my career was over. The doctors had said the recovery would be long and arduous. The stress of being an investigative journalist, the deadlines, the danger, it was simply out of the question now. They had already made arrangements. They were selling my city apartment, putting my things in storage. They had found a lovely, quiet house for me, up the coast, a place where I could heal, where they could take care of me. There would be no more chasing dangerous stories, no more putting myself at risk. It was a new life, a quiet life, a safe life. They said it was for my own good. In my weakened, shattered state, I had no capacity to argue. The grief over Liam was a physical weight, pressing all the air from my lungs, silencing any protest. The loss of my career felt like a distant, secondary amputation. What did it matter without him? I simply nodded, the gesture taking a monumental effort. I let them swaddle me in their concern. I let them dismantle the life I had built, piece by painful piece. They were my family. They loved me. They were just trying to protect me. At least, that's the story I told myself. That's the lie I lived with for weeks, as they moved me from the sterile white of the hospital to the suffocating beige of my new life. The house was beautiful, a quaint little cottage in a sleepy Maine town overlooking the Atlantic. It was a postcard of tranquility, and for me, it was a prison. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of managed care. My mother, Eleanor, fluttered around me, plumping pillows and brewing herbal teas, her constant presence a form of gentle suffocation. She filled the house with bland, inoffensive art and spoke of the future in vague, placid terms. We would plant a garden. We could join a book club. My father, Robert, would visit on weekends, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and a palpable air of uneking anxiety he tried to mask with paternal bluster. He would pat my hand and tell me how much better I looked, how the sea air was bringing the color back to my cheeks. He never spoke about my old job. He never, ever spoke about Liam. It was as if they had both been surgically removed from my history. My brother Julian was the worst. He'd saunter in, wearing his success like a costume he hadn't earned, a job in marketing at some soulless tech firm, a position I knew our father had secured for him. He would look at me with a mixture of pity and a strange, triumphant satisfaction. He'd make comments like, "See, Avery, this is much better, isn't it? No more grubbing around with criminals and malcontents, just peace and quiet." He was the golden child, the one who had always been praised for his mediocrity, while my ambition had been treated as a strange and troubling personality flaw. Now, with my wings clipped, he seemed to finally be at ease in my presence. I was no longer a threat, I was just his broken little sister. To help with my physical recovery, my parents hired a therapist named Marcus. He was a stark contrast to my family's oppressive gentleness. He was direct, professional, and had a no-nonsense kindness that I found surprisingly grounding. He'd arrive 3 times a week, pushing me through painful exercises to rebuild the atrophied muscles in my legs and arms. He didn't treat me like a porcelain doll, he treated me like a person who needed to get strong again. "Your body remembers how to do this, Avery," he'd say, his voice steady as he helped me stand. "You just have to convince your mind to get out of its way." He was an outsider, a neutral party in the carefully curated theater of my recovery, and for that I was grateful. He was the only person who didn't look at me with that suffocating pity. But as my body slowly began to heal, my mind started to betray the peaceful narrative my family had constructed. It started with small things, a flash of memory, sharp and vivid, that didn't fit their story. I'd be staring out at the gray ocean, and suddenly I wouldn't see the waves. I'd see the glint of chrome from a black sedan in a rearview mirror, tailing us on a city street. I'd smell the toast my mother was burning in the kitchen, and be instantly transported back to the car, smelling not burning bread, but the acrid scent of deployed airbags and something else, something sharp and chemical. The official story was that a truck had lost control on a wet road, a tragic, random accident. But these flashes felt different. They felt intentional, targeted. The most disturbing fragments were of Liam. I would close my eyes and see his face, not peaceful or gone, but alive, urgent, his mouth forming words. One night I jolted awake, my heart pounding, a single word echoing in the silent room: Omnigen. It was the name of the corporation I had been investigating for the better part of a year. A massive, shadowy biotech and defense conglomerate with tendrils in every corner of government. Liam and I had been building a case against them, alleging massive fraud and illegal weapons testing. We were on the verge of breaking the biggest story of my career. A story that my family now claimed was part of a life that no longer existed. I tried to talk to my mother about it once. I mentioned Omnigen, testing the waters. "Mom, do you remember that story I was working on before the accident?" Her smile became a brittle, fixed thing. "Oh, darling, let's not dwell on the past. That was a different life. It's too much for you to think about right now." It wasn't about revenge, until it was. But at that point, I didn't know what it was. I just knew something was profoundly wrong. Her dismissal was too quick, too absolute. It was the way you'd speak to a child having a nightmare, trying to convince them the monsters weren't real. But I was starting to suspect the monsters were very real, and they were sleeping right down the hall. The catalyst came on a Tuesday. My parents and Julian had gone into the city for the day to attend some charity luncheon, a public performance of their perfect philanthropic lives. They left me with a fridge full of food and a list of emergency numbers as if I were a teenager. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It was the first time I had been truly alone in months, and the clarity was breathtaking. I felt like a prisoner who had just found her cell door unlocked. The feeling was so strong, so urgent, that I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to do something. I thought about the storage unit. They had told me they'd packed up my apartment, and I pictured boxes of my life gathering dust. But then I remembered something: my work laptop. The one with all my notes, my sources, my entire Omnigen investigation. They had told me it was destroyed in the crash, beyond recovery. It was a plausible lie. But what if it wasn't true? What if in their rush to erase my past, they had simply packed it away? My father was meticulous, but he was also arrogant. He might have overlooked it, deeming it a worthless piece of junk. I found the keys to the storage unit in a little ceramic bowl by the door where my mother kept spare things. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt in half a year. I called the only cab company in town and gave them the address of the facility, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. The storage facility was a desolate place, a grid of corrugated steel doors under a pale, indifferent sky. My unit was at the back. The key slid into the lock, and with a groan of protest, the heavy door rolled up. The air that hit me was stale, thick with the ghost of my old life. There were the boxes, neatly labeled in my mother's perfect script, kitchen, books, Avery's winter clothes. But in the back corner, tucked behind a standing lamp and a box of old photo albums, was a black canvas satchel, my work bag. I could barely breathe. I knelt, my knees cracking in protest, and unzipped it. And there it was, my laptop. It was scuffed and dented, the chassis slightly bent, but it was intact. I took it back to the house, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me. It was a relic from a former life, a life where I was a hunter, not the hunted. I pressed the power button, it whirred to life. Then, the login screen. It demanded a password. My mind raced. I tried my old defaults, my birthday, my mother's maiden name. Nothing. Access denied. I felt a wave of despair. I was so close. Then I thought of Liam. What would he have made the password? Something only I would know. Something simple, something sentimental. He always teased me for being too complex. His password philosophy was the opposite. I remembered his goofy, three-legged rescue mutt, the one he'd named after a character in his favorite book. I typed it in, my fingers fumbling on the keys. BARNABY. The screen flickered and my desktop appeared. I nearly sobbed with relief. I ignored the folders of research, the half-written articles. My eyes went straight to the email client. I clicked it open. The program chugged, then began downloading new messages. And then I saw it, a list of emails in the inbox. The sender's name made the world tilt on its axis. Liam. The dates weren't from 6 months ago. They were from last week, yesterday, 2 hours ago. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. He wasn't dead. He wasn't dead. He was alive. With trembling hands, I clicked on the most recent email. It wasn't a long emotional reunion. It was clipped, coded, the way we used to communicate when we were deep in a story. Subject: weather report. Body: sky is clear for now, but a storm's coming. The gardener is compromised. The greenhouse is no longer safe. I'm in a new field. They can't find me. The seeds are safe, but you need to find the main taproot. Remember the trophy, check the base. Don't trust the old groundskeepers. They planted the weeds. Stay low, stay quiet. I'll find a way. I love you. The gardener. That was his code name for my father. The greenhouse. Our family. The seeds were the data, and the taproot, the master file, the trophy. It hit me like a physical blow. The prestigious journalism award I'd won 2 years prior. The one my father had insisted on displaying in his home office. A symbol, he'd said, of his pride. It was a lie. All of it. The accident, Liam's death, their loving concern. It was all a monstrous, intricate deception. The crash wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt by Omnigen. And my father hadn't just worked for them. He had helped them. He had sacrificed his own daughter and the man she loved to protect a corrupt corporation. He chose his company over his child. The grief I had felt for Liam curdled into white-hot rage. The sorrow I felt for my lost life transformed into a cold, hard resolve. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. My face was pale and thin, my eyes wide with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. They had tried to bury me. They had tried to erase me. They thought they had made me weak, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had given me time to heal. They had given me a quiet place to think. And now, they had given me a reason to fight. My family wanted me to live a quiet life, and I would. I would be the quietest, most invisible storm they had ever seen. It wasn't about getting my old life back anymore. It was about taking theirs apart. The first step was to become the person they wanted me to be. The transition had to be seamless. The rage I felt was a nuclear furnace inside me, but on the surface, I had to become a placid lake. When my family returned that evening, flushed with wine and self-satisfaction from their luncheon, I greeted them with a gentle, tired smile. I was the broken daughter, the fragile patient. I asked my mother if she could help me pick out some new curtains for my bedroom. I asked my father a dull question about the stock market. I listened to Julian brag about some minor professional victory with an expression of mild, sisterly interest. I played the part of Avery, the invalid, and I played it for an Oscar. Every moment was a performance. It was exhausting, but the thought of what was at stake, the image of Liam's coded words, "I love you," was a constant fuel. My physical therapy sessions with Marcus became my lifeline. He was my only connection to the outside world that wasn't filtered through the lens of my family's control. I started using our sessions not just to rebuild my body, but to rebuild my plan. He was perceptive. He noticed the change in me, but not in the way my family did. He saw a new focus in my eyes, a determination that went beyond just learning to walk again without a limp. One afternoon, while I was balancing on one leg, my muscles screaming, he said, "Something's shifted, Avery. You're not just going through the motions anymore. You're training for something." I looked at him, my heart pounding. It was a risk, a massive one. But I was an investigative journalist. My entire career was built on reading people, and my gut told me Marcus was trustworthy. He had no love for my family. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened when my father would condescendingly call him the muscle guy, or when my mother would try to pay him with a plate of cookies as if he were a neighborhood boy mowing the lawn. He saw their condescension, their suffocating control. I decided to give him a piece of the truth, a carefully selected, plausible piece. After he helped me to a chair, I took a deep breath. "Marcus," I began, my voice low. "My family, they're very controlling. Since the accident, they've managed all my finances. They sold my apartment, my car. They say it's to help me, but I feel trapped. I don't even have my own phone. I need to get back on my feet, and not just physically. I need to regain my independence." I watched his face carefully. His expression softened from professional distance to genuine empathy. He'd seen it. He'd seen the gilded cage they'd built for me. "They treat you like a child," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What do you need?" "I need a phone," I said, the words rushing out. "A burner phone, something they can't trace. And I need a way to get online without using their network. Can you help me?" He didn't hesitate. "I can," he said. "My brother works at one of those little electronics repair shops. I'll get you a prepaid phone and a mobile hotspot. No questions asked." The relief was so immense it almost brought me to tears. I had an ally, my first recruit in a silent war. The next day, he brought me a small package tucked inside his medical bag, a cheap smartphone and a hotspot device, a lifeline to the world they had tried to cut me off from. That night, with the house settled into a deep, ignorant slumber, I huddled under my blankets, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face, and made contact. I created a new encrypted email address and sent a message to the one Liam had used. Subject: Weather report. Body: got your message. The gardener and his helpers are tending the greenhouse daily. I'm playing the role of a wilting flower. I understand about the taproot. I need to get into the main office. Planning a visit soon. Be careful. I love you more. The reply came within minutes. He's waiting for me to check. He's online. The thought sent a jolt of warmth through my cold anger. Liam's response was practical. He told me the trophy was my primary objective. It was a custom-made award. He had been there when it was delivered, and before I even brought it home, he had expertly pried off the felt bottom of the heavy marble base, milled a tiny cavity inside, and created a space for a micro SD card. He'd sealed it with a resin that was indistinguishable from the marble itself. It was brilliant. My father, in his hubris, had taken the very symbol of my success, the thing that represented the career he wanted to destroy, and placed it on a shelf in his inner sanctum, never suspecting it was a Trojan horse. Getting to it was the next problem. My father's home office was his fortress. He kept it locked. I needed a reason to be in the house, a reason to get into that room. The opportunity came, as it often did, wrapped in the guise of family tradition. My mother announced their annual summer garden party, a lavish affair where my parents showcased their wealth and social connections. It was the perfect cover. Dozens of people would be milling about the house and garden. In the chaos, I could slip away. I told my mother I wanted to help. I wanted to feel useful. I suggested I could organize the place cards, a simple, sedentary task they would deem appropriate for my condition. She was delighted. "Oh, Avery, that's wonderful. It shows you're finally starting to accept your new life." Her words were a twisted little knife, but I just smiled. The day of the party, I dressed the part, a simple, flowy summer dress, my hair pulled back. I looked pale, pretty, and harmless. For the first 2 hours, I sat at a small table on the patio, greeting guests, making small talk, my eyes scanning the flow of traffic in the house. My father was in his element, holding court by the bar. My mother gliding through her guests like a ship in full sail. Julian was trying to impress the daughter of one of my father's business associates. They were all distracted. This was my chance. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I stood up, using my cane for effect, and made my way slowly into the house, heading for the hallway that led to the back of the house and the office. A cousin tried to stop me to ask about my health. I gave her a weak smile and said I was just feeling a bit faint and needed to sit down in a quiet room for a moment. Her look of pity was my backstage pass. I reached the office door. It was as I expected, locked. But I had planned for this. Weeks ago, during one of his visits, I had accidentally knocked my father's briefcase off a table. As I helped him pick up the scattered contents, I had palmed his spare set of keys, the one he was always misplacing. It was a simple matter of making an impression in a bar of soap I'd taken from the guest bathroom and having Marcus get a copy made. It was a classic, old-school trick, something out of a spy novel. It felt fitting. The key slid into the lock and turned with a soft, satisfying click. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The room smelled of leather and my father's smug certainty. And there, on a glass shelf among photos of Julian's graduation and my parents' wedding, was the trophy. A gleaming silver figure holding a pen aloft, mounted on a heavy block of black marble. My hands were shaking as I lifted it. It was heavier than I remembered. I carried it to my father's large mahogany desk and sat down in his throne-like leather chair. Using a small sharp letter opener from his desk set, I carefully worked at the edge of the felt bottom. Just as Liam had instructed, it peeled away cleanly. Underneath, the marble looked solid. For a terrifying second, I thought I was wrong, but then I saw it, a hairline seam, almost invisible. I pressed my thumbnail into it, and a tiny section of the marble popped out. And there, nestled in a bed of custom-fit foam, was a single micro SD card. The taproot. I didn't have a device to read it, but I didn't need to. I just needed to secure it. I popped it out, replaced the marble plug, and smoothed the felt back down. I placed the trophy back on the shelf, positioning it exactly as it had been. Then I slipped the tiny card into a small hidden pocket Marcus had helped me sew into the lining of my dress. I was in the room for less than 5 minutes. I walked out, locking the door behind me, and slipped the key back into my pocket. I walked back out onto the patio, my face a mask of calm. My mother saw me and rushed over. "Avery, darling, are you all right? You look a bit flushed." I leaned on my cane and gave her a tired smile. "Just a bit overwhelmed, Mom. I think I might need to lie down for a bit." Her concern was the perfect exit strategy. As I walked back to my cottage, the tiny powerful secret tucked against my skin, I knew the balance of power had just irrevocably shifted. The performance was about to end, and the real show was about to begin. The days following the garden party were the most difficult. I had the weapon, but I couldn't use it yet. I had to wait. Marcus had procured a card reader for me, and in the dead of night, I finally saw what was on the SD card. It was everything. It was more than I could have imagined. Liam hadn't just been my partner. He had been a ghost inside Omnigen's servers for months. There were encrypted financial records detailing a massive slush fund used for bribes and problem-solving. There were internal memos signed by my father authorizing the illegal sale of experimental drone technology to a blacklisted regime. And there was the smoking gun, a series of emails between my father and Omnigen's head of security, a ruthless former intelligence operative. They discussed the journalist problem. They talked about me. They planned the accident down to the last detail, including a contingency to neutralize the source, Liam, and frame it as a tragic fatality. The final, chilling detail was a confirmed wire transfer from the slush fund to a shell corporation linked to the security chief, dated the day after the crash, the payment for a job well done. Reading it felt like being electrocuted. Seeing the cold corporate language my father used to orchestrate the attempt on my life, and the murder of my fiancé broke something deep inside me. Any lingering, sentimental shred of daughterly affection I might have harbored was incinerated in that moment. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. And now it was about a cold, methodical justice. Liam, through our secure channel, gave me specific instructions. "Don't go to the press, Avery. That's a gun with a silencer, and they know how to handle it. You need to use a cannon. We go to the feds." He had a name, a contact he had been cultivating. A deputy director at the Department of Justice who had been trying to build a case against Omnigen for years but lacked the internal evidence to get a warrant. This was the key. My first move had to be silent, untraceable. I couldn't just walk into a DOJ office. My family was monitoring me, suffocating me with their care. So I used the tools of my old trade. I packaged the most damning, most easily verifiable pieces of evidence, specifically the wire transfers and the memos about the illegal drone sales, redacting anything that would immediately point to my father into an anonymous encrypted data packet. Using a public library computer 2 towns over, a trip I'd justified to my mother as wanting to borrow some large print novels, I sent the packet to the DOJ contact Liam had given me. There was no note, no name, just the data. It was a seed of chaos, planted in the most fertile ground imaginable. Now all I had to do was wait for it to sprout. It took 9 days. 9 days of playing the part of the docile, healing daughter. 9 days of listening to my mother's banal chatter and enduring Julian's smug condescension. Then, one morning, my father came down for breakfast, looking like he had seen a ghost. His face was ashen, his hands trembled as he poured his coffee. He was staring at his tablet, at a headline on a financial news site. OmniGen Holdings under federal investigation for arms trafficking. The article was vague, citing anonymous sources and a data leak, but it was enough. The market reacted instantly. OmniGen's stock, the bedrock of my family's fortune, began to hemorrhage value. It dropped 10% in the first hour of trading. The panic in our quiet little prison was immediate and palpable. My father started making frantic, hushed phone calls in his study. My mother fluttered around him, asking what was wrong, her voice shrill with anxiety. Julian, who had coasted into a cushy job at OmniGen, was apoplectic. "What does this mean, Dad? What about my stock options? Are they worthless now?" His first thought was, as always, for himself. I sat at the kitchen table, calmly eating a bowl of oatmeal, and watched the life they had built on secrets and blood begin to crumble. I feigned confusion. I asked innocent questions. "What's a federal investigation? Is that bad?" My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, paranoid fear. "It's nothing, Avery. It's just a corporate witch hunt. A competitor is trying to smear us. It will all blow over." But I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe it. The cannon had been fired, and the sound was now echoing through the halls of his empire. He had no idea the person who lit the fuse was sitting right in front of him, asking him to pass the brown sugar. The investigation was a slow-motion demolition. First came the subpoenas, then the federal agents started visiting the OmniGen headquarters. Low-level employees were interviewed, then mid-level managers. The noose was tightening, and the atmosphere in our house grew more toxic by the day. My father's paranoia escalated into tyranny. He would pace the house at all hours, his phone glued to his ear, his conversations clipped and furious. He was trying to plug a leak in a dam that had already burst. My mother, her social standing threatened, retreated into a state of weaponized fragility, prone to weeping fits and blaming my father for bringing this darkness into their lives. Their perfect union was fracturing under the first real pressure it had ever faced. The first major crack in their facade came from the weakest link, my brother Julian. As the golden child, he had never faced a moment of real adversity in his life. He was soft, entitled, and utterly unprepared for the kind of pressure the federal government can apply. He was called in for questioning. My father coached him for hours, drilling a cover story into him, telling him what to say and what not to say. But I knew Julian. Under pressure, his only loyalty was to himself. He went in cocky and came out 2 hours later, looking like a ghost. He drove straight back to the house, stormed into my father's study, and I heard them shouting. I crept to the door, listening. "They knew, Dad." Julian's voice was high-pitched, hysterical. "They asked about the Al-Qadir shipments. They had memos. How could they have memos?" There was a heavy silence, then my father's low, dangerous growl. "What did you tell them?" I told them I didn't know anything. Julian shrieked. But they kept pressing. They said they could charge me with conspiracy. They talked about prison. I might have mentioned that you were the one who always handled the special logistics projects. I told them you signed off on everything. He had done it. The karmic agent, the unwitting truth-teller. In a pathetic attempt to save his own skin, Julian had thrown our father directly into the path of the speeding train. He had become the government's star witness against his own father. The betrayal was so poetic, so perfectly symmetrical to my own, that I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. The family unit didn't just fracture, it exploded. Eleanor turned on Robert with the fury of a woman whose life of comfort and status was about to be obliterated. Julian locked himself in his room, refusing to speak to anyone, a petulant child hiding from the consequences of his actions. The carefully constructed image of the perfect supportive family had been a mirage all along, and the slightest heat had caused it to evaporate. It was in this state of chaos that my father made his final desperate move. He came to me. He found me sitting on the porch, looking out at the calm, indifferent ocean. He sat down beside me, his face a ruin of stress and fear. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. For the first time, he looked at me not as a broken object to be managed, but as a potential asset. He began to spin a new story, a masterpiece of self-pity and manipulation. "Avery," he started, his voice thick with false emotion. "There are things you don't understand about OmniGen. It's a dangerous place. Everything I did, It was to protect this family, to protect you. He confessed that he worked for them, painting himself as a man trapped, a man who had to make difficult choices for the greater good of his family. He claimed the accident was something Omnigen had done without his approval, that he had been trying to get me to stop my investigation to keep me safe from them. It was a pathetic, disgusting performance. Then came the pivot. You were a great journalist, Avery. You still have connections, don't you? People who owe you favors. I need you to find out who the source is, who is leaking this information to the DOJ. If you can find that out, I can stop this. I can save us. We're a family. We have to stick together now, more than ever. He was trying to recruit me to hunt myself. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive. He was looking at the instrument of his destruction and asking it for help. I looked at his desperate, pleading face, the face of the man who had ordered my death, who had lied to me for months, who had shown no remorse, only fear of being caught, and I realized the power I held was absolute. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. A family, I repeated softly. Yes, we should all talk, together, tonight. Let's have a family meeting. He seized on it, a drowning man grabbing for a vine. Yes, that's a wonderful idea. A united front. I nodded slowly. A united front, I echoed. He had no idea he was agreeing to his own execution. The confrontation was set for that evening in the grand living room of my parents' house, the very stage where they had performed their happy family charade for decades. The air was thick with a cloying tension. My father, Robert, stood by the fireplace, trying to project an aura of patriarchal control that had long since evaporated. My mother, Eleanor, sat rigidly on a silk sofa, her face a mask of anxious denial, and my brother Julian was slumped in an armchair, the picture of sullen, self-pitying defeat. They were all looking at me, expecting me to be the one to offer a solution, to somehow use my broken past to fix their shattered present. They thought I was there to save them. I walked into the room without my cane. It was a small act of defiance, but a significant one. I felt my own strength, solid and real, in a way I hadn't in months. I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the room, letting them all look at me. The silence stretched. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Avery, he began, his voice taking on that familiar, condescendingly gentle tone. I'm so glad we're doing this. Your mother and I, and Julian, we're all under a tremendous amount of pressure. We need to present a united front. A united front, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the still room. That's an interesting choice of words. It implies a common enemy. Julian snorted from his chair. The enemy is the government, obviously. They're trying to ruin us. I turned my gaze to him. No, Julian. They aren't the enemy. They're just the consequences. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the burner phone Marcus had given me. I placed it on the polished mahogany coffee table between us. The mood in the room shifted. This was not part of their script. I've been doing some digging, Dad, I said, my eyes locking with his, like you asked. I looked for your whistleblower, his face flooded with a desperate hope. And, did you find him? Who is it? I gave him a small, cold smile. Oh, I found the source, but it's more complicated than that. First, there's something you all need to hear. I tapped the screen of the phone. A recording began to play. It was an audio file from the SD card, a phone call between my father and Omnigen's head of security, recorded just days before my crash. The quality was crystal clear. My father's voice, calm and clinical, filled the room. The liability is too great. The journalist problem needs a permanent solution. Make it look like an accident, a tragic random event, no loose ends. The source she's with, the boyfriend, he's a loose end. Make sure he's part of the tragedy. The color drained from my mother's face. She stared at my father, her mouth agape in genuine, unfeigned horror. Julian shot upright in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. My father looked as if he had been turned to stone. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any I had ever known. That, I said softly, was you, Dad, ordering a hit on me and on Liam. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Robert, no, that can't be. Oh, it's real, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I have the wire transfers to the shell corporation that paid for the hit. I have the memos you signed authorizing illegal weapons deals. I have everything. I looked from my father's ashen face to my mother's crumbling composure to my brother's terrified confusion. You built this life, this beautiful, perfect life, on corruption and blood. My blood. I took a step closer. You asked me who the whistleblower was. You're looking at her. The confession hung in the air, a stunning, brutal blow. My father sank into a chair, his face in his hands. He didn't deny it, he couldn't. And there's one more thing you should know, I said, delivering the final, killing strike. You were worried about loose ends, but you failed. Liam isn't dead. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes wild. What? He's alive, I said, the words tasting like victory. He's been in witness protection this whole time, and he is going to be the star witness at your trial, Dad. He's going to stand up in court, and he's going to tell them everything. The destruction was absolute. Their reality, their carefully constructed world of lies, had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. Robert was a broken man, stripped of his power and his dignity. Eleanor was weeping, not for me, not for what had been done, but for her lost status, her lost life. And Julian, he just stared at me, a dawning horror on his face as he realized the full scope of the ruin he had helped bring about. He had betrayed our father to save himself from a crime he didn't even understand, a crime that now seemed so much worse than he could have ever imagined. I looked at the three of them, the architects of my prison, now trapped in the rubble of their own making. I felt nothing, no pity, no lingering affection. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where my family used to be. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, clean certainty. They said my old life was over. They were right, but this was the beginning of a new one. I turned and walked towards the door. My mother cried out my name. Avery, wait, where are you going? I paused at the threshold but didn't look back. I'm going to live the quiet life you always wanted for me, I said, and you're going to live with the noise you created. I walked out the front door and didn't stop. Outside, parked at the end of the long manicured driveway, was a car. Marcus was in the driver's seat, the engine running, waiting to take me away. I got in, and we drove off into the night, leaving the house of lies to collapse in on itself. In the end, the fallout was swift and merciless. My father and his co-conspirators at Omnigen were arrested in a series of high-profile raids. The story was headline news for weeks. The combination of my evidence and Liam's testimony was insurmountable. My father was convicted on multiple counts, from fraud and conspiracy to attempted murder. He will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, a place far removed from the leather-bound luxury of his home office. Omnigen was dismantled by regulators, its assets seized and sold off. The corporation my father sold his soul for ceased to exist. Julian, for his early and panicked cooperation, received a much-reduced sentence. He served 18 months in a low-security facility. I hear he now lives in a small apartment somewhere in the Midwest, working a menial job, his golden boy shine forever tarnished. And my mother, she lost everything. The house, the money, the social standing she prized above all else. She was a pariah. None of her fair-weather friends wanted anything to do with the wife of a notorious criminal. The last I heard, she was living with her sister in a small town, a ghost of her former self. They all got what they deserved, not because of some grand, vengeful plan I orchestrated, but because of the simple, unchangeable law of cause and effect. Their own actions led them to their own ruin. It wasn't about revenge for me, not really. It was about the truth. The truth doesn't care about feelings. It doesn't care about family ties or social status. It's a force of nature, and once it's unleashed, it simply washes away everything that isn't real. Liam and I were finally reunited. That moment, seeing him walk towards me, alive and whole, was the real victory. It was the end of a nightmare, and the beginning of everything else. We moved away, to a place where no one knew our names, where the past couldn't find us. We built a new life, a genuinely quiet life, one chosen, not imposed. I didn't go back to investigative journalism. The fire for it had been replaced by a desire for peace. Instead, using some of the reward money from the DOJ's case, we started a small foundation that provides legal and financial support for corporate and government whistleblowers. We help people who, like us, decide to speak truth to power, no matter the cost. They tried to bury me. But they didn't realize I was a seed. That's the thought I keep coming back to. They saw my compassion and my integrity as a weakness they could manage and discard. They thought that by breaking my body and my heart, they could break my spirit. But my spirit wasn't in my career or even in the life I thought I had. It was in my connection to the truth. And that is something no one can take from you. They can lie to you. They can gaslight you. They can try to build a whole new reality around you. But the truth exists independently of their efforts. Finding it and holding on to it is the ultimate act of power. And now I want to turn it over to you, my family, my father especially, would argue that his actions, however monstrous, were born from a twisted desire to protect his family's prosperity. He would say he was a provider. My mother would say she was just trying to keep the peace and help her daughter heal. Some might even look at my actions, the deception, the secret recordings, the cold and calculated takedown of my own family, and say that I became as ruthless as they were. So I want to ask you, what do you think? Was this justice, or was it revenge? Is there a difference? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you've ever been in a situation where you had to fight to be heard or to reclaim your own story from people who tried to rewrite it, I hope my story gives you a little bit of strength. Thank you for listening.